skies above Adam's Jeep were turning a shade of grey that only promised one thing: rain. Large, heavy droplets splattered against the windshield, the sharp sound reverberating through the otherwise quiet cabin. Adam cursed under his breath, feeling the frustration rise in his chest. He had been anticipating this fishing trip for weeks, an escape from the suffocating pressures of his life. The constant demands of the hospital, the never-ending discontent from his wife Tiffany, and the gnawing emptiness in his soul, all of it had driven him to this moment. Now, just as he was about to retreat into the embrace of nature, even the weather seemed to be conspiring against him.
"Just my luck," he muttered, his voice laced with annoyance as he steered the Jeep off the dirt road, maneuvering it into a clearing by the riverbank. The sound of his tires crunching over gravel was drowned out by the incoming storm, and the river, swelling with the relentless rainfall, roared ominously ahead of him. He could already see the dark clouds gathering, the sky so thick it felt like the weight of the world was bearing down on him. Adam had driven 3 hours to get here, and nothing, not even a torrential downpour, was going to send him back now. With a grunt, he wrestled the tent from the back of the Jeep, trying to keep his balance in the soggy mud. His thoughts, however, were far from the task at hand. They drifted back to the argument he'd had with Tiffany just before he left. Her words echoed in his mind, sharp and dismissive. "You should focus on your career instead of wasting time outdoors. God knows we could use the money, Adam." Her voice had been dripping with condescension, and the sting of her words lingered in his mind. Tiffany had expensive tastes: designer bags, luxury vacations, and fine dining. His salary as a surgeon at the local hospital, despite being respectable, often felt inadequate to keep up with her demands. But it wasn't about the money. Adam hadn't chosen medicine for the wealth or the status, not even for the prestige that Dr. Greg Hartley, his chief of surgery, always seemed to flaunt. No, Adam had become a doctor to heal, to make a tangible difference in people's lives. As the wind picked up and rain began to pelt harder, Adam finally managed to set up the tent. But as he stood there, drenched to the bone, the reality of the situation hit him. The rain wasn't letting up anytime soon. His quiet getaway was quickly turning into a washout. Resigning himself to the storm, he crawled into the tent and peeled off his wet clothes, replacing them with dry ones as the sound of the storm raged outside. The sound of the rain, constant and unrelenting, soon lulled him into a restless sleep. His thoughts drifted, but the weight of his argument with Tiffany remained. Maybe she was right, he thought. Maybe this was all a waste of time, this attempt to find peace in the wilderness, when his life back home was falling apart. Yet, as the thought passed, Adam realized something. It wasn't a waste. These quiet moments, alone in nature, away from the sterile hallways of the hospital and the constant pressure of his domestic life, were the only thing that kept him grounded. It was in these rare silences that he remembered why he had become a doctor: to help, to heal, and to make a difference. But as the night deepened, something unexpected stirred within the storm's fury. A faint cry reached his ears, cutting through the rhythmic sound of the rain like a dagger. At first, Adam thought he was imagining it, the wind and the rain playing tricks on his senses. But then he heard it again, a sharp, desperate scream. His heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" Adam called out, unzipping the tent, his voice trembling slightly. Is someone there?" Another scream, closer this time, sent a chill down his spine. Without a second thought, Adam sprang into action. He rushed out of the tent, ignoring the rain that now seemed to soak him to the bone once more. Through the mist and downpour, he could barely make out the figure of a small boat struggling against the raging current of the river. "A woman,"
She was frantic, her hands gripping the edge of the boat, desperately trying to steady it as the waves tossed it mercilessly. Adam didn't hesitate. He stripped off his wet shirt and shoes, diving into the cold, rushing water with a powerful stroke. The current was fierce, but Adam had swum in the early mornings of the hospital pool for years, and the water, though frigid, was no match for his strength.
As he approached the boat, he could see more clearly. The woman was young, her face a mask of terror, and her belly, she was pregnant, very pregnant. A wave of fear gripped Adam as he realized the gravity of the situation. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the river, his voice barely audible. "I'm coming for you." The woman's eyes locked with his, wide with panic. "Please, help me," she cried, her voice trembling as the boat teetered dangerously close to capsizing. Adam didn't think. He moved, his body driven by years of training, instincts honed in the ER. He reached the boat, just as a massive wave threatened to overturn it. With all his strength, he pushed against the side of the boat, his body weight anchoring it against the surging water.
"It's okay," Adam panted, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I've got you. What's your name?"
"Clara," the woman gasped, her teeth chattering from the cold. "Clara, please, hurry." Clara, I'm Adam. I'm a doctor," he said quickly. "We're gonna get you out of here. Can you swim?"
Clara shook her head, her face contorted with pain. "No! Oh, God! It's coming!"
Adam's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what she meant. The signs of labor were unmistakable. "Okay," Adam said, forcing his voice to remain calm. Listen to me. We need to get this boat to shore. When I say push, I need you to paddle with your hands as hard as you can. Can you do that for me?"
Clara nodded, her face filled with determination despite the agony in her eyes.
What followed was a grueling battle against the river. Adam, half swimming, half pushing the boat, fought the current with every ounce of strength he had. Clara, though exhausted and in pain, paddled weakly but persistently. After what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, Adam's feet finally scraped the muddy riverbed. With a final surge of energy, he pulled the boat onto the shore. Clara collapsed in his arms, her legs buckling beneath her. "You did it," Adam gasped, his voice hoarse as he helped her stumble toward the shelter of his tent.
But just as they reached the tent, Clara doubled over, her face twisted in agony. Adam's heart raced as he helped her inside, the small space now feeling impossibly cramped. She collapsed onto the sleeping bag, her body racked with pain as another contraction took hold. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. And Adam, for all his experience in the operating room, had no idea just how much he was about to learn about the true meaning of healing. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a wounded animal, rattling the edges of the makeshift shelter where Adam and Claire huddled together. It had all happened so fast, too fast for Adam to fully process. The frantic cries from Claire had escalated to desperate gasps. "It's coming! Oh, God!" "It's too soon," she had whispered, her breath coming in shallow bursts.
Adam's mind spun with panic. He wasn't an obstetrician, not even close. But the years spent in the hospital as a surgeon, with rotations in every department, had given him a foundation. He could handle this. He had to.
"Claire, listen to me," Adam said, his voice firm, forcing his way through his own panic. He locked eyes with her, willing her to focus. "I know you're scared, but I need you to focus. We're going to do this together, okay?"
Claire's tear-streaked face nodded, though her hands trembled, clutching her swollen belly. Adam could see the fear in her eyes, and it broke something inside of him. But there was no time for that now. The baby was coming, and there was no one else to help.
He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had delivered enough emergency procedures in his career to know the steps. He'd seen the birthing process once during his residency, and while that was years ago, it would have to be enough now.
Okay, I need to check how far along you are. This might be a little uncomfortable, Adam explained gently, his hand steady as he examined her. His heart dropped when he realized just how quickly the labor was progressing. Too quickly. His mind raced through possible scenarios. Could they make it to a hospital? No, not in this weather. There was no time. "You're doing great, Claire," he reassured her, though his voice wavered slightly. "When the next contraction hits, I need you to push. Can you do that for me?" Claire's face contorted in pain as the next contraction gripped her. With a guttural cry, she bore down, her body trembling with the effort. That's it, Adam coached her, feeling the baby's head beginning to crown. "Just one more big push, Claire. We're almost there." With an almost primal scream, Claire pushed again, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the baby was there. Small, wrinkled, fragile, but alive. Adam's hands shook as he caught the tiny body, his pulse racing with something he hadn't expected. Joy. Overwhelming and pure. A cry, sharp and strong, filled the tent, echoing like a victory cry into the storm outside. "It's a boy," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't help it. His chest swelled, and for a fleeting moment, the storm outside calmed, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge the miracle. Claire, her face a mixture of exhaustion and wonder, gazed down at her son. "He's perfect," she whispered through her tears, her hands trembling as she cradled him. "Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much." Adam watched them, the mother and her newborn, feeling something shift deep within him. This was why he had become a doctor. Not for the accolades, not for the money, but for moments like this, raw, real, and miraculous.
As the storm outside began to ease, Claire shared her story, her voice quiet but steady as she recounted her life up until this point. "My father, he's an alcoholic," she began, her hand gently stroking the baby's soft hair. He went mad when he found out I was pregnant. I ran away, thinking I could make it to my aunt's house, but the storm. I didn't know what to do."
Adam listened intently, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. She had been so young, so alone. The father of the child, a boy named Jake, had promised to stand by her, but when things had gotten hard, he had disappeared. "I thought I could make it," Claire said, her voice breaking, "but the storm, it got worse and I didn't know what else to do."
"You're not alone anymore, Claire," Adam said softly, his heart aching for her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a comforting squeeze. "We're going to take care of you both. You're safe now."
As the storm cleared, Adam packed up his meager campsite, the reality of what had just happened starting to sink in. They had done it. They had brought a life into the world against all odds. But as he looked over at Claire, his mind couldn't help but drift. Life had just become infinitely more complicated for him. He hadn't signed up for this. He had done his part, but the journey for Claire and her baby was far from over.
"Let's get you to the hospital," Adam said, his voice steady once more as he started the engine of his truck. Claire, exhausted but relieved, cradled the baby in her arms. He had fashioned a makeshift car seat from blankets and pillows, but he drove slowly, carefully, hyper-aware of the fragile life in the passenger seat beside him. As they approached the hospital, something gnawed at Adam, a sense of unease he couldn't shake. He should have been relieved, should have felt like he was handing over the responsibility to those who knew better. But he didn't. He felt something else, something unspoken. He didn't want to let go. He wasn't ready to sever the connection, to hand them over to strangers.
"We're here," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as he pulled into the emergency bay. Claire stirred in the passenger seat, blinking sleepily. "Thank you, Adam," she murmured, "for everything." Adam helped her inside, briefing the on-duty staff about the unexpected delivery. As they wheeled Claire and the baby away for further examination, Adam watched them disappear down the hallway, a strange lump in his throat. His work here was done, but somehow it felt like more had been left undone. He turned and left, knowing that he still had to face the consequences of his own life. Back in the quiet of the city, the drive home was long, and Adam's mind remained fixated on Claire, the baby, and what had just transpired. He barely noticed the familiar surroundings of his suburban neighborhood as he pulled into his driveway. But when he opened the door to his home, he immediately sensed that something was wrong.
The house was eerily quiet, too still. And then, there it was, the unmistakable pair of men's shoes in the entryway. Expensive shoes, shoes that Adam knew all too well. His heart pounded as he ascended the stairs, dreading what he might find. The muffled voices from their bedroom made his blood run cold. No, it couldn't be. But as he pushed the door open, his worst fears were confirmed. Tangled in the bedsheets, his wife, Tiffany, was there with none other than his boss, Dr. Greg Hartley.
For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then Tiffany, startled, pulled the sheet up to her chest. "Adam," she gasped, "you're home early."
Adam stood there, frozen in the doorway, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. His boss looked caught, but there was a challenge in his eyes, a dare. "What are you going to do about it?" that look seemed to say.
And in that moment, Adam realized just how much his world had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same again.
Adam stood there, his voice uncharacteristically calm as he addressed Tiffany, his gaze unwavering. "At least have the decency to look remorseful," he said, his words measured but cutting. Tiffany opened her mouth to respond, but Adam didn't give her a chance to explain. "How long, Tiffany? How long has this been going on?" His voice rose slightly, a faint tremor of disbelief creeping in, but he quickly quelled it.
Before she could answer, Greg intervened, his voice maddeningly composed. "Look, Winters, let's not do anything rash. We're all adults here. These things, they happen." Adam turned sharply to face him, the quiet fury in his chest beginning to smolder. "These things happen?" Adam's voice was thick with contempt. "Is that how you justify betraying your employees' trust and sleeping with his wife, Greg?" Greg's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "Careful, Winters," he warned, his voice cool and dangerous. "Don't forget who signs your paycheck."
A chill ran down Adam's spine, but he didn't flinch. "Is that a threat?" His voice dropped to a low growl.
Greg met his gaze unflinchingly. "No," he said, his words deliberate. "It's a reality check. You make waves about this, and I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Understand?" Adam looked from Greg to Tiffany, their faces finally clear in his mind. He saw Greg for what he truly was, the ambitious cutthroat surgeon who valued profit over the people he was meant to heal, and Tiffany, the beautiful, status-obsessed woman who never truly understood his passion for medicine, for healing. In that moment, Adam realized with painful clarity that he had never really had them, not truly. They were strangers to him, even if they'd shared a life together. Without another word, Adam turned and walked out of the room.
He heard Tiffany's voice rise in panic behind him, but it barely registered. He couldn't look back, not now. The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed in his chest. He didn't pause as he packed a bag, stuffing some clothes and essentials into a duffel. As he stepped out of the house and into the cool night air, he felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just anger or hurt. It was a feeling of release, of freedom. Driving aimlessly through the streets, his thoughts were a whirlwind. His mind raced with the aftermath of everything, the shocking confrontation, the emotional fallout of his marriage shattering, and yet, a part of him felt something else. A stirring deep inside, something he hadn't felt in years. He checked into a small anonymous hotel just off the highway. There, in the sterile confines of his room, his mind settled into a strange quiet. He thought of Claire. He thought of the miracle birth he had witnessed, the raw emotion of that moment, and the look on Claire's face as she held her newborn son. It was the same look that had touched something deep within him, something he'd forgotten. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Adam smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile. He knew, suddenly, what he needed to do.
The next morning, Adam stood outside the maternity ward of the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as he walked the long corridor. He hadn't slept much. The past few days had blurred together into an overwhelming mix of chaos and revelation. But now, as he stood before Claire's room, he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that had eluded him for years. He knocked gently on the door, his voice low as he peeked inside. "Claire, it's Adam. Is it okay if I come in?" When Claire saw him, her face lit up, her tired eyes sparkling with a quiet joy. "Adam, of course. Come in. We were just talking about you." Adam entered, his heart swelling at the sight of Claire cradling her son. She looked exhausted, but there was an undeniable radiance to her mother. New motherhood had softened her features, and in that moment she looked more beautiful than ever. Adam pulled up a chair beside the bed, feeling a surge of affection for both her and the little boy she held so carefully in her arms. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice gentle.
"So," Claire admitted, her lips curving into a rueful smile. "But happy. So happy." She gazed down at her son, her face full of love. "I've decided to name him Adam," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. Adam felt a lump form in his throat. "Claire, I'm honored, but you don't have to do that." But Claire shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to. You saved us both, Adam. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that." Adam cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the praise. "Well, little Adam certainly looks healthy," he said, forcing a smile. "Have the doctors said when you can be discharged?" Claire's smile faded slightly. She shifted in her bed, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Actually," she began, her voice hesitant, "that's what I wanted to talk to you about. They're discharging us today, but I don't have anywhere to go. I can't go back to my father's, and I don't have any other options." Adam leaned forward, a sudden thought forming in his mind, and with it, a decision that seemed to settle deep in his bones. "What if," he started, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if I came with you?"
Claire blinked, clearly taken aback. "What? Adam, no! I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," Adam replied softly. "I'm offering." He took a deep breath, his decision solidifying. I know this sounds crazy, but the truth is, I don't have anything holding me here anymore. My marriage is over, and I'm fairly certain I've just lost my job, but out there, in your village, you said there's no doctor there, right? Claire nodded slowly, her expression one of disbelief and cautious hope. Yes, but Adam, are you sure? This is a huge decision. You hardly know me, and life in Cedar Grove isn't exactly glamorous. Adam let out a laugh, a sound of pure relief. Trust me, Claire. After the past few days, glamour is the last thing on my mind. I became a doctor to help people, real people, not just those who can afford expensive surgeries or private hospitals. He met her gaze, his heart lightening with the truth of his words. This feels right.
Claire's eyes filled with tears. Adam didn't need to say anything more. She reached out and took his hand, her voice breaking as she spoke. You're sure about this?
Adam smiled, the weight of the past few days finally lifting. I'm sure. The dust swirled in the air like a swarm of bees as the old pickup truck bounced along the gravel road. The steady rattle of the engine filled the quiet morning, blending with the occasional chirp of birds perched on the tall, swaying trees. Adam sat behind the wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror to catch glimpses of CLA as she gently rocked baby Adam in her arms. Her face, though soft with the glow of motherhood, betrayed an undercurrent of nervousness. The weight of the journey ahead loomed heavy on her shoulders, but she didn't speak of it. She didn't need to.
How do you feel? Adam asked softly, his voice barely rising above the hum of the engine. Claire glanced up, her eyes tired but steady. I feel ready, I think. It's been a long time. Adam's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to do this alone, he said, the words a promise as much as a reassurance. His heart swelled as he glanced at the baby, the tiny life in her arms. It was as if the mere sight of him made everything worth it, the long nights, the uncertainty, the fear. His whole world had changed in an instant.
She nodded, though her expression was unreadable. I know, she murmured, but still, it's been years. Adam didn't press. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, on the ever-closer village of Cedar Grove. He'd never been here before, but he'd heard enough about it over the years. A small town, tucked away in a valley surrounded by dense trees and mountains that seemed to protect it from the outside world. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were scarce. As they crested a hill, the view unfolded before them, a patchwork of old, weathered homes and fields that stretched out beneath a sky so wide it felt like the entire universe had opened up just for this moment. There it is, Clea whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Adam slowed the truck as they descended toward the village. The streets were narrow, the buildings old but sturdy. The town felt frozen in time, a stark contrast to the fast-pacing life Adam had left behind. There was a quiet, almost eerie stillness to it, like a place where memories lived and breathed. A pair of elderly women stood at the corner, gossiping, their heads snapping to attention as the truck rumbled by. A man with a weathered face tipped his hat as they passed. News traveled fast in small towns, and Adam knew that the arrival of CLA, along with her baby and the strange man at her side, was bound to stir some whispers. They were the talk of Cedar Grove before they even set foot on its soil.
Just follow me, Clea said, her voice steady now as she pointed toward a narrow street that led away from the center of town. She directed Adam to a house on the outskirts, a small, slightly run-down cottage that stood alone among the trees. The paint was chipped and the yard looked unkempt, but there was something about the place that felt familiar to her.
As they pulled into the gravel driveway, the front door of the house flew open, revealing a man in his 60s. His hair was graying, and his face was weathered by time and hard work. His eyes, sharp and tired, locked onto CLA as she stepped out of the truck with the baby in her arms. He stood there, unmoving, for a long moment before a low growl escaped his lips. "You've come crawling back, have you?" Frank Thompson's voice was rough, edged with years of bitterness, and with a brat in tow, no less. PLA flinched at his words, but Adam stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and her father. His hand rested briefly on her arm, a silent gesture of support.
"Mr. Thompson," Adam said, his voice calm but firm. "I know this is unexpected, but I'm here to make things right. CLA and we have a son now, and I'm taking full responsibility for my actions. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she and our child are taken care of."
Frank's eyes narrowed, flicking between Adam and CLA as though weighing his words. For a moment, there was a tension in the air, thick enough to choke on. Nobody moved. Then, to Adam's surprise, Frank let out a rough bark of laughter, shaking his head.
"Well, I'll be damned," Frank muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "At least you've got more backbone than that good-for-nothing Jake. Come on in, all of you." He turned and strode back into the house without another word. As they followed him inside, Ciela shot Adam a look, a mixture of gratitude and awe. She hadn't expected him to stand up to her father like that, but there was something about Adam, something steady, something strong, that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. Adam gave her a small wink in return, his heart swelling with protectiveness. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew this: he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. To them.
The house was cluttered but clean, with faded family photos lining the walls. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something earthy, like the land itself. Frank didn't waste any time. He gestured for them to sit at the kitchen table, where a stack of old newspapers and unopened mail sat scattered across the surface.
He rummaged in the fridge for a moment before returning with a 6th pack of beer, the cold cans clinking together. "Well, let's hear it then," Frank said, cracking open one of the cans and leaning back in his chair. "How does a fancy city doctor end up with my CLA?" He raised an eyebrow, his tone skeptical but oddly intrigued. Adam settled into the seat across from him, the weight of Frank's gaze heavy on him. He met the older man's eyes and felt a flicker of something like respect, maybe. But there was also a guardedness there, a challenge. Adam knew he had to earn this man's trust, just like he had to earn CLA's.
"I suppose it's a long story," Adam began, his voice steady as he leaned forward. "But I can tell you this: I didn't come here to cause any trouble. I came here because CLA deserves better than the life she's had, and I'll do everything in my power to give her that. I'm not the man I used to be, Mr. Thompson, and I'll prove it, one way or another."
For a long moment there was silence. Frank's eyes flickered over to CLA, then back to Adam, before he took a slow swig of his beer. "Well, I'm listening," he said finally, his voice gruff but not without a hint of something. Curiosity, maybe? Or something deeper. "Let's hear it then. What's a man like you really want with my daughter?"
As the evening light began to fade, casting its golden glow through the kitchen window, Adam and CLA sat across from Frank, recounting their remarkable journey. The story, still fresh in Adam's mind, was retold with just enough embellishment to give his claim of paternity more weight. while subtly tugging at Frank's hardened exterior. It was as though the layers of gruffness that surrounded him were beginning to peel away, bit by bit, with each word spoken.
"You sure about all this?" Frank asked, his tone rough but no longer as cold as before. He shifted in his chair, his eyes scanning the baby in CLA's arms. Adam nodded, his gaze steady. "I am, Frank. It's not something I'd claim lightly." His words were sincere, and as they spoke of the past few weeks, there was an unspoken understanding beginning to form between them. Then, without warning, CLA stood and gently placed baby Adam in Frank's arms. The moment the baby was nestled there, Frank's gaze softened, and his hands, though calloused, instinctively adjusted to hold the child with surprising tenderness.
"He's got the Thompson nose, that's for sure," Frank muttered under his breath, a hint of pride slipping into his voice, a note that hadn't been there just a moment ago. Adam's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Frank, despite his initial resistance, was beginning to accept the reality of their situation. As the story reached its conclusion, the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Frank ran a hand through his thinning hair, the weight of the past few weeks settling over him.
"Well," he sighed deeply, a certain weariness in his voice, "I can't say I'm thrilled about how this all came about, but what's done is done." His gaze shifted from Adam to CLA. "You two can stay here until you get on your feet."
Adam nodded solemnly. He'd made a promise to himself to take care of them, to do right by CLA and the child. But there was something else weighing on his mind, something he felt he had to address now that the air had cleared a little.
He cleared his throat. "I was actually hoping to speak with you about the village clinic. I heard you've been without a doctor for a while." His eyes met Frank's, studying him with an openness that had become second nature in the past few weeks. Frank's expression darkened, his brows furrowing as he crossed his arms. "That's right. Old Doc Miller retired last year, and since then we've been struggling to find someone to fill his shoes." His voice was sharp, but there was something else there, perhaps a flicker of hope or the smallest hint of vulnerability. "You offering?" Adam didn't hesitate. "If you'll have me," he said, the words rolling off his tongue with a quiet confidence. "I may not know much about small-town life, but I'm a damn good doctor, and I'm ready to learn."
Frank's face softened, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his weathered features. Well, he chuckled. "Looks like Cedar Grove might have lucked out after all." He extended a hand to Adam, his grip firm yet welcoming. "Welcome aboard, Doc. Something tells me life around here is about to get a whole lot more interesting." That night, as Adam helped Esla settle into her old room, a sense of peace settled over him that he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, he knew that. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, with the right people by his side. The future seemed a little less daunting with each passing moment.
The following weeks in Cedar Grove were nothing short of a whirlwind for Adam. Word of the new doctor spread quickly, as news tends to do in small towns. Before long, every resident, from newborns to the elderly, seemed to have a reason to visit the clinic, even if it was just to introduce themselves. The clinic, while small and somewhat run down, was a far cry from the bustling hospitals Adam had trained in. Its walls, once white, were now a muted shade of beige, with peeling paint and outdated equipment scattered about. Yet to Adam, this was not a potential, a blank canvas where he could make a difference.
One particularly crisp afternoon, as Adam was organizing medical supplies in the back of the clinic, the sound of the bell above the door jingled, signaling someone's entrance. Adam looked up, a smile immediately spreading across his face, when he saw CLA walk in, her son wrapped in a soft blanket against the cool autumn breeze.
"Well, hello there," he greeted, his voice warm and inviting. "What brings you two into town today?"
CLA smiled, soft blush coloring her cheeks as she glanced down at her son, who was cooing contentedly in her arms. "We just wanted to see how you were settling in," she said, her voice sweet but tinged with a subtle hint of something else. Concern, perhaps? Or maybe just the need to feel connected to someone who was becoming more important to her with each passing day. "And, well, I thought you might like some company for lunch."
Adam's heart skipped a beat. Over the weeks, he'd found himself drawn to CLA in ways he hadn't expected. Her quiet strength, her kindness, and the way she devoted herself to her son. It all combined to create a woman who was unlike anyone he had ever known. He'd grown fond of her, perhaps more than he had allowed himself to realize. Until now. "I'd love that," Adam replied, his smile widening. He hesitated for just a moment before adding, "Why don't I close up for an hour? We could have a picnic by the river. There's a beautiful spot I've been wanting to check out."
Clay's face lit up, and she nodded eagerly. "That sounds perfect." They made their way to the riverbank, where the trees stood tall, their branches stretching high into the sky, casting long, dappled shadows across the ground. The air was crisp, but the sun's warmth still lingered, making the day feel like an embrace. They laid out a blanket, and as they sat down, Adam couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over him. He watched as CLA carefully unwrapped the baby from the blanket, her gentle hands moving with such tenderness, and for a moment, everything felt right. They shared sandwiches, talked about the small things that seemed so important in the moment, and watched as baby Adam gurgled happily at the clouds above, his tiny hands reaching for the sky. The world seemed to slow down around them, and Adam realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was truly happy. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but sitting there with CLA and her son, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The future, as uncertain as it was, suddenly seemed a little less intimidating.
As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Adam's heart felt light. It wasn't just the peaceful surroundings or the promise of a new life in Cedar Grove. It was the realization that, in this quiet little town, surrounded by new faces and new beginnings, he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for, a place to belong. The air was thick with the scent of fresh wildflowers as Adam sat on the edge of the worn wooden bench, the sounds of the river gently cascading behind him. It was early, the first rays of the sun casting a soft golden hue over Cedar Grove, yet Adam felt wide awake. The stillness of the morning was comforting, but it was the quiet, unspoken truth of his life now that gave him peace. His life, once tangled in the complexities of a past that felt like another lifetime, was now simple, pure, and full of purpose. And it all began with that fateful night when Claire had appeared at the edge of the riverbank, her baby clutched in her arms, needing him more than anyone ever had. Claire had been the first to break the silence that evening, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "You know," she began, eyes sparkling with a mixture of fondness and mischief, "the whole town's been talking about you. Mrs. Jennings over at the general store says you're the best thing to happen to Cedar Grove since they paved Main Street." Adam couldn't help but laugh at the thought. "I'm not sure about that," he replied with a chuckle, shaking his head. "But I have to admit, I'm loving it here. The work, it feels meaningful, like I'm really making a difference."
Claire's eyes softened as she nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "You are, Adam. You've brought hope back to this place, not just with your medical skills, but with your presence, your heart."
The two of them stood there, facing each other in the peaceful quiet of the meadow, their words heavy with an unspoken truth. For a brief moment, Adam felt an invisible pull between them, a force that he couldn't explain, but knew was undeniable. His breath caught as he found himself leaning in, his heart pounding in his chest. But the tender moment was abruptly broken by the wail of baby Adam from inside the house, demanding attention. Claire laughed softly, scooping up the baby and teasing. "Looks like someone's jealous of Mummy getting all the attention." Her smile was playful, but there was a quiet promise in her eyes. It made Adam's heart swell. And as they packed up their picnic, he found himself caught between a world of overwhelming feelings he hadn't expected, and a life he never thought he deserved. Not so soon, after the wreckage of his divorce.
Over the next few months, Adam poured himself into his work, his connection to the community growing deeper with each passing day. He was more than just a doctor here. He was a lifeline, a friend, and a trusted figure to those in need. He organized vaccination drives, led health education seminars, and started a weekly clinic in the neighboring town. Word of the dedicated country doctor spread quickly, and soon people were traveling from all over the county to see him. His old colleagues might have scoffed at the idea of house calls or bartered payments, but for Adam, this was a calling. This was where he belonged. And somehow, with each patient he saw, his bond with Claire and little Adam deepened, solidifying his place in Cedar Grove as more than just a doctor. He was part of something bigger. They fell into a quiet rhythm, sharing meals, taking walks by the river, and spending evenings together. Adam found himself looking forward to these moments more than anything else, the simplicity of them grounding him in a way he had never felt before. One chilly December evening, as they sat on Claire's porch, watching the first snowflakes of the season flutter down from the sky, Adam turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper.
"Claire," he said softly, his heart racing, "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, her eyes soft, reflecting the twinkling Christmas lights strung along the porch railing. "What is it, Adam?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself. I know I'm falling in love with you. And with little Adam. You two have become my family in every way that matters. I know it might be too soon, and if you don't feel the same, I understand. But I couldn't keep it to myself any longer.
Claire's eyes filled with tears, but there was a smile on her face that melted Adam's heart. "Oh, Adam," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you pulled me from that river. I was just afraid to hope."
Without another word, Adam pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like everything he had ever dreamed of. As they broke apart, breathless and grinning, little Adam let out a joyful gurgle from his bassinet, as if in approval. "I think someone approves," Claire laughed, leaning her head on Adam's shoulder as they sat together watching the snow fall. In that moment, Adam knew, without a doubt, that he had found something worth fighting for, something he never even knew he was searching for. A year later, as the sun peeped over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the river, Adam made his way down to the water with his fishing rod in hand. The early morning air was crisp, the promise of a perfect spring day hanging in the cool breeze. As he settled into his favourite spot along the riverbank, he thought about the year that had passed. The clinic, that now flourished thanks to a grant he had secured, and the outreach programs he had started to ensure no one in Cedar Grove went without the care they needed. But above all, he thought about Claire and little Adam, how they had become the very centre of his world.
His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, familiar voices approaching. He turned to see Claire walking down the path, little Adam perched on her hip. "There's Daddy," Claire said, pointing towards him with a smile.
Little Adam squealed in delight, his chubby arms reaching out toward Adam, and Adam felt his heart swell. He reeled in his fishing line, setting the rod down as he moved to meet them. He scooped his son up, planting a kiss on the little one's downy head, before pulling Claire into a long, lingering kiss.
"What are you two doing up so early?" he asked, though his voice was thick with the joy of their presence. Claire smiled that special smile, the one reserved just for him. "We woke up and you were gone. This little guy insisted on finding you."
"You are certain?" I laughed, swerving to put her on her shoulders. Adam chuckled, bouncing the toddler in his arms. "Is that right, buddy? You wanted to go fishing with Daddy?" Little Adam babbled excitedly, reaching for the fishing rod. "Careful now," Adam warned with a grin. "Looks like we've got a future angler on our hands."
As they stood there, by the same river where their journey had started, Adam felt a sense of completion. This was everything he had ever wanted, everything he didn't even know to ask for. He looked down at Claire, the woman who had saved him in ways he would never fully understand, and then at little Adam, whose laughter filled the air like a song. "You know, Claire," Adam said softly, his voice full of wonder, "sometimes I still can't believe how lucky we are, how one stormy night changed everything." Claire leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I know what you mean, but you know what? I don't think it was luck. I think this is exactly where we were always meant to end up." As the sun rose higher in the sky, painting the river in shades of gold, the little family stood together, their hearts full and their future brighter than any of them could have imagined. Adam knew, without a doubt, that Cedar Grove wasn't just a fresh start. It was home, and he had finally found his true calling, not just as a doctor, but as a husband, a father, and a vital part of this community he now called his own.